It's kind of like the music.
I kind of like the music too. I was doing the same actually. Yeah. Boogieing on the first TBQ live of the year. Love it.
Love it indeed. Hello, everyone. Welcome to TBQ Live, the first one this year, Maria said. Great to be back here and great to be here with you, Maria.
And you too, Rena. It's lovely. I've really been looking forward to this one specifically as well. I love the idea of thinking about thinking.
I know. So let's spend some time thinking about thinking. I love it. That's like a tongue in itself. But such an important topic. I'm very, very delighted to welcome all of you who are listening to this live or indeed as a recording. This is TBQ Live. You're joined today by Maria Chase, who is my co-host, and myself, Reena Dayal. We are absolutely delighted. We are here with you every second Tuesday and the fourth Tuesday of every month. That's the plan. That's TBQ Live. And today we're going to be talking about a very important topic, which you saw just in that slide before, which is about thinking and unraveling the science behind how we think and why it's so important. And we'll delve into all of those lovely details, but a little bit about TBQ Live for those who are joining us for the first time. This is a live video cast that takes place every second and fourth Tuesday, hosted by Maria and myself, and we cover one or more of the 9 levers in the book called The Brilliance Quotient. And we are all about raising awareness, because we understand and we recognize with all the work that we do with C-suite, with leaders, is that once people understand the science of how we are and why we are and who we are, we begin to understand the art of leadership and how we can lead ourselves, our teams, our businesses, and communities to greater success. And we've had some great topics thus far, haven't we, Maria?
We've had some great ones. I really, really enjoyed the combating fatigue, because we're all feeling rested, but give us another month and we'll start to have that again. So maybe have a look at that one. And also neuroplasticity. So exciting. We can wire in the mindsets that we need. But we've covered some great topics in the last year, and this year it's going to be even more exciting.
Absolutely. And the neuroplastic organization, such an important one. In fact, that's the reason why Maria and I have started a new program called the New Blueprint, which is really helping people understand how they can lead themselves and make business decisions which are far more agile, far more futuristic, and far more stable in a world that's becoming extremely unpredictable and disrupted. So I love that one as well. And what Maria is talking about is all our recordings are actually available. So if you go to the link, which is there right on LinkedIn or indeed Facebook or YouTube, you can watch them as well. I quite like the one on getting fit, because apparently that's the biggest New Year resolution that people are making this year. It's how to be more fit and more healthy. And I don't know whether you're doing any New Year resolutions this year, Maria. Are you?
I actually started some running. I've actually started, because not only is it a very traditional New Year's resolution, but in a pandemic world, I think it's got even more momentum, because we are all realizing that our health first and foremost, and our mental health. And the more you are fit in your body, the more you are fit in your mind. It's a huge correlation. So absolutely, yes, I've started running. Tiny, but every journey starts with one step.
Absolutely. And all about how you think at the end of the day about running as well. So we'll get into a bit more on that and on the topic for today. But let's just ask ourselves a very, very basic question to begin with. Is what do we mean thinking? I mean, it's such a simple statement, because we are always thinking all the time. But even in this slide, let's just pull out a few nuances when we try to get into the world of thinking, so as to speak. Now, the Cambridge Dictionary actually use the ones that are quoted on the top left. It's the activity of using your mind to consider something. Or when you say this is somebody's thinking, you talk about somebody's ideas or opinions. And then there is something called critical thinking that became quite popular in man jargon about thinking the way that you need to be thinking, and it's all about making informed decisions. So important today in the world of business and leadership, and something that we spend a lot of time when we are coaching and training teams and leaders who are very performing but want to become sharper in their skill. Because if you look at the definition out there, it says critical thinkers possess many other essential skills, including analysis, creativity, problem solving, empathy. So it seems to be quite holistic and huge. And I remember when I was going through my management training, or indeed when you look at a lot of leadership programs, these are the kind of skills that people are taught. How to be more analytical, how to do problem solving, how to be more empathetic leaders, how to be more creative. These are quite important skills that individuals need to have. And even so now in a disruptive world, Maria and I are always asking and helping people understand is what goes behind those skills. Because there is something that's taking place that makes us more analytical or makes us more creative or helps us have far more creative problem solving skills. But what's that? So how can we throw a light or understanding? How do we think? Because once you start understanding how you think, you get more choices on how you can think better. I mean, look at that thing on the other side, which is the two systems. And the two systems, I've kind of now that picture. There's a soul sling out there. You can go and have a look. But this is really taken from a book written by Daniel Kahneman, who wrote this book called Thinking Fast and Slow. Daniel Kahneman, for those who might not know him, though this book is actually quite popular and you might have heard about it. It's actually a Nobel Prize winner in the early 2000s. I want to say 2002, and he got it for economics. Because what he did was he went into understanding how the brain works and applied it in how people can think about making business decisions and economical decisions as well. So he talks a lot about what he calls thinking fast and slow. There are two systems. The thinking fast is a far more reflexive system, and it's a part of the brain that's making quick decisions. It's continuously scanning the environment, and Maria's going to tell you a little bit more about it because I'm going to just ask her in a second. But that's your thinking. It's things that we do intuitively, like having to drive, or if I was to ask you what's your age, or when you're looking at somebody and trying to read facial expressions. There's certain things that we do intuitively. It's fast, quick, it happens on the go. But because it's so fast and quick, there are some boxes hidden out there that we'll unravel in a bit. And the thinking slow system, which Daniel talks about, is all about being far more analytical, looking at perspectives, coming up with a sounder judgment, making sure that you don't have any blind spots. And he says these are two systems that operate, that battle within all of us. And it becomes important for all of us today to be aware of these systems and get into understanding how each of us are thinking at any point of time. Because in a world which is very crowded and at times which are so stressful as they are at this moment of time, we might be thinking faster because we have to make quick decisions, which could be leading to. In fact, in the new blueprint, what we do is we spend a lot of time really helping people understand and expand their knowledge of thinking, because that's the bedrock of what all leaders and executives are doing today. In fact, all human beings are doing today. So in our new blueprint program is a revolutionary science-based leadership program that is available for teams and leaders. 4 out of the essential scientific concepts that we cover off is all around thinking, and it's about default thinking, limited thinking, really trying to understanding how the brain works. What creates and controls stress? How do you do creative thinking? How do you make decisions which are far more creative at this moment of time? How can you have visionary thinking? What drives out performance? How can you create a new reality? How can you be disruptive? So those are the things that we do to really expand our knowledge of thinking. Maria, do you want to chip in here before you go into your wonderful trying to understand how the brain works and what happens in the brain when we are thinking?
Absolutely. And one of the things that you mentioned about the fast and slow thinking is it's reflective. The fast thinking actually comes from using all of our information from all the data, from all the responses that we're getting in from the environment, but it doesn't actually go through our cognitive executive functions necessarily. And that's what slows it down and means that we can actually pull apart the things, and rather than just react in the moment, because our first reaction isn't always the one we would choose in hindsight when we're being genius with that 20/20 vision backwards. So we really pull out in the new blueprint all the different types and which is the best fit for purpose. Because default thinking sometimes is perfect. It's all you need at that moment in time. But there are times when you need visionary thinking. It's a different system. It has a different approach. What's really important to remember also is we are all uniquely wired in our brain. So how everyone thinks is so unique. And let's face it, we're all paid to think nowadays. We may do some things, but the majority of people nowadays are paid to think. So by knowing and really drilling down at which particular flavor of thinking you need, means you can cut out a lot of time that could easily be wasted. So yeah, very, very massive subject that we're going to just kind of ease into today and get close to.
Fabulous.
So carry on. So which parts of our brain do we use to think, Rena? Next slide.
Indeed. I am getting on to our next slide, and as I do that, and it's just a very quick point that you made out there, which I want to stress upon, is when, this whole thing about fast and slow. So while Daniel calls it fast and slow, our belief is that if you understand how your brain works, so the whole thing about thinking slowly, which is the far more rational thinking that Maria is going to go into, with habit and with knowledge and awareness, you that fast as well. So it's really something that you can upskill yourself in, and don't think you have to be slow. You can be fast, but you need to understand how. And that's why knowledge becomes really important, and understanding how we think. Maria, over to you on this one.
Brilliant. And also really important point. When we talk about slow in terms of the brain, it's really quick anyway. Yeah. We're talking about fractions of seconds. Okay. So thinking, it's a giant topic because it's what our brains do. Yeah. We can point to parts of our brain, but bear in mind, as with all new cutting edge sciences, what we think today may be upgraded tomorrow. So I've done some very general parts of where we can point to in our brain as to which parts of our brain. It's very much the top part of our brain, the parietal, the frontal lobes, the part that developed much, much later. And a really important point to make is that's what differentiates us from animals. We have bigger brain capacity, which means that when input comes in, rather than just reacting and being reactive like animals very often are, we've got some room where we can actually play around with that input and then choose what we're going to do. And that's the difference. So these frontal lobes, the latest part of our brain to develop, right behind the forehead, it's where we do our rational thinking. Yeah. Where we are serial. A equals B equals C. It's very, very linear. It's very, very logical. It's also where we do our reasoning. And our reasoning is very much about taking lots of different data and kind of integrating it. What does this actually mean once that is correlated with something else? So reasoning and rational are slightly different. There's a subtle difference, but it's about the amount of data we're using. And I've put in there the fact that the frontal lobes are where we express our personality, because as I said, everyone thinks in an entirely new way and a unique way. And there's, nowadays it's about using your unique thinking to bring value and, add value to any conversation that you have. So the orbital frontal cortex is a smaller part of the frontal lobes, and that's where we make our decision making. It's also where we do all of our visual processing. What's worth bearing in mind, though, is we can hold within that small 4% of the brain's overall mass, we can only hold between 5 and 9 pieces of information, and that depends on how well we know them. So in actual fact, I think we've all done it. You remember something, you're thinking about that, something new comes in and suddenly something's dropped off. It's almost like a shelf. There's only so much room in that part of the brain to actually think consciously. And one of the things about thinking is when we discuss thinking, we're talking about the conscious effort of thinking. What we'll go on to later is that there are other processes of using data that actually are unconscious. And if we combine both, then we have the best possible thinking. Okay, so those are the two brain areas. But what you have in the brain is a huge amount of networks that all coincide and work together. And the two that I've pulled out are the Salience network, and that integrates how I'm feeling in my body, my feeling state, with our thinking, our decision making. And I think what's really important to bear in mind is if I'm feeling in one way, I will think very slightly differently than if I'm feeling another way. So if I'm having quite a low energy day and it's January, it's raining, etc., my thinking is going to be clouded by that, because the Salience network also tags what is salient to us. What do I need to take notice of? It actually directs where your eyes, with another brain system, it actually directs where your eyes look. So, for example, night sky, I know how you adore astronomy and all those sort of things, Rena. So you've got the night sky, you're just watching. When a meteor goes by, suddenly our Salience network kicks in and we look at that, because that is suddenly really important if we're being an astronomer, etc. So salience makes a difference to how we think, what's important, and what is important today might not be important tomorrow. I mean, the world moves so quickly. You've got to be a really agile leader. What might have been your bottom line yesterday may not be your bottom line by the end of the week. Your priorities constantly change. So bear in mind, thinking is also about what's going on in the external world, but it's also about what's going on in the internal world as well. And what's also hugely involved in our conscious thinking process is our default mode network. Now, this is where we have that kind of, when you're kind of just idling, like a car would be in neutral, is where we have that abstract thinking. It's where we do that daydreaming. It's the system, the network that actually also evokes our nighttime dreaming. It's where we do that self-reflection. It's also where we think, hold on, I wonder what Rena's feeling like today. And I could have a good guess at that. So it's about internal reflection as well as taking other people into consideration. Now, the default mode network is the network that happens when you're not conscious. It's not goal-orientated thinking. That's something slightly different. That's when you then look at your orbital frontal cortex and go, right, I've got this goal. That's when salience networks come in. But let's not blind you with science. Basically, the default mode network is, when people go, I'm always thinking, like you said at the beginning, Rena, we're always thinking. That is the default mode network. And also that's the network that things like meditation turn off, so that actually our mind is quieted and we're not having all these random thoughts going in. So if we go on to the next slide, Rena, if we're able to do that, I want to talk also about other intelligences, because if you think about thinking, it's about taking data and integrating it with what you know, but also future. What can I do with this data? Where do I want to get to? So it's also, we've talked about it in other ones of these video casts, about the fact that we don't just have neural cells in our head. We have the biggest collection in our head, but we also have a huge amount of neural cells in other parts of our body, all over our body, but the intensity is mainly in the gut and in the heart. The head is all about logical. We talked about that rational. We talked about that reasoning, sequential kind of thinking. So the head takes all of the information from the body and then starts to logically process it. The gut, however, has a huge amount of neural cells in it, in the digestive tract. And it's more about what nourishes us, what's good for us. Yeah. What's good for us is food that we enjoy, but it's also, the brain doesn't make a differentiation between physical and psychological. So it's also what nourishes us psychologically, what situations are really lovely for us, or what situations actually drain us and are not useful. It's worth bearing in mind that 90% of serotonin is actually produced in our gut. So what we eat makes a massive amount of difference to our mood, which is really being understood so much more, and people are really taking some control, especially at New Year's. I bet a lot of New Year's resolutions are about eating healthier. And then you've got the heart, which is the seat of our emotional intelligence. The heart's so clever and so much another type of brain that it can actually turn on our adrenaline without even asking our head. Yeah. So, when your heart speeds up, maybe when you see someone you really like, or when you see when I see my grandchildren, my heart's like, yeah, really, really, it's where our intelligence for that connection, that kind of oxytocin, where we want to be connected with other people. And what's interesting to note is there's more neural pathways going up to our head than going down from our head. So our heart has a lot to say, if you want to put it in those terms, and our head has less to say to the heart. So the heart has a huge amount of information that is actually fed into how we think about things. So as I've said in many of our broadcasts, you're a democracy. See what your head says, see what your gut says, see what your heart says, and then start making some decisions, because all of that will factor into how you think and how you feel. Okay, so that's all of the different kind of systems about how we think. Like I said, when it comes to neuroscience, it's a movable feast, because at this moment in time, there's a huge amount of research that just sometimes changes what we thought yesterday. What's worth bearing in mind is thinking is a top-end executive system. If we want to consciously think, we're using 20% of the body's overall resources, even though the part of our brain that we're thinking in, this part just behind our forehead, is only 4% of the body's mass. So or the brain's mass, not the body's mass, of the brain's mass. So it's really worth bearing in mind that conscious thinking, is an energetic process. So if you want to do good thinking, it's about raising your energy as well. The brain was made to move us. So if you're sat there and you're finding it quite hard to do any thinking, give yourself some movement, because that really energizes the brain. Okay, I think I've done enough science. Let's do some application, Rena.
Now, I think so the science continues in this conversation today, because we really want to focus on the science element around it. But so vitally important, all that you're talking about, even elements such as the gut and understanding, when we make that statement, what is our gut saying? What is it when you make that statement? What do you mean by it? Or, a lot of people make that statement about, what is my heart saying? Should I listen to my heart, or should I listen to my head? And, all of this is very much based on science. I mean, and thinking about food and eating and how it affects the way we think, the energy levels inside us. I mean, if I was to step back on the days of when it was first discovered, in the days of Ayurveda, it's all that basic science behind it. You ate things because it created a certain chemistry inside your body, which helped certain chemicals to be created, and the energy levels were changed. And in that itself, it talks about how every individual is made in a different way. So it really helps people to understand a bit more about the science, because often we are trying to copy each other. And that's not the point. It's really trying to understand more uniquely who we are, how we think, how our body is made up. But today, since we're talking about thinking, we'll continue to talk about how unique you are in your thinking and how we think as individuals. At the end of the day, I think so we have realized more and more that decisions need to be made. And decisions are being made today by leaders and teams around the world. And this is just a snapshot of the kind of decision making some of our clients face in the last 1 year, who've kind of been talking to us. And I'd love to ask you that question, but what decisions do you have to make? I mean, we have got today people asking questions like, how do you raise productivity of remote teams and leaders? It's a different ballgame altogether. It's a different context. How do you scale up from a 5x to 5x growth, from a 2.5x growth in 12 months? That's one of our clients who were asking that question. Now, for all of these questions, which do not have a precedence, like the first two that we're talking about, sometimes what happens is that we're trying to look for answers, but the landscape that is available to us is limited. So think about the word that we talked about, limited thinking. It's limited, and because of the way that our brain is functioning. So you need to expand the way that you're looking, expand your perspectives, per se. If you think, people are asking questions about, should I hire people right now? Should I fire them? The leaders will ask about, should we ask for a salary hike? And should you keep a client who, you might not be aligned with, but it means business and revenue? Should you keep them or not? Businesses are asking the question, should we downsize, expand, hold fire? For entrepreneurs, a big thing about, should I delegate or not? These are decisions that we are making on a day-to-day basis. And when we're talking about the science behind it, I think that's how it's working, because sometimes making decisions without necessarily really thinking through. You're going through a default mechanism, and so you make choices because of the default networks that are there in your body, or perhaps the salience networks, which, as Maria was talking about, is unique to each one of us. So you will be thinking very differently, and it makes really a lot of powerful sense to understand how you make decisions, and which is why it becomes important for us to start thinking about what are the default thinking patterns that we have. What are the ways, what are the assumptions that we normally make in life? What are the limiting beliefs, or what are the beliefs that we have? And there might be some assumptions and beliefs that you and I might be making, which help us be far more productive. So for a second, let's not think that everything is limiting you. Expand you and make you more creative as well. But the important thing for us, why in today's day and age, that we talk a lot about some of these limited thinking, or those things that restrict you, or that kind of create stress, is because times are very stressful. And when times are very stressful, the brain goes into default mode. All your decisions go back into default mode. So you cannot make new decisions because it's just trying to be in a survival mode, which is why it becomes really important to talk about some of these decisions and how you're making these decisions. And all these decisions, actually, this is a great one. I'd like to invite you back in, because all those decisions that we're talking about has got certain levels of thinking as well. So that's another angle that we'd like to bring in to your thinking.
Absolutely. Not only do we have different types of thinking, but there is a hierarchy of how we think. And it's the hierarchy that makes the difference between making great decisions or getting bogged down in certain places or getting stuck. And as Rena said, sometimes we can do reflexive things that are great for us, but other times our reflexes don't take into consideration the new perspectives that we need to take. So the top end of thinking, i.e. the type of thinking that uses the most brain systems. Yeah. If you think about the brain, there is a myth that we use 10% of our brain. That's been debunked ages ago. We use lots of different parts of our brain, but vision thinking, if you think at the top end of how much you can use your brain, vision thinking is the one that uses most. And the thing about vision thinking is it uses the occipital system, which goes from my eye to the back of my head. It's actually laterally the longest brain system. And the thing being, if I'm thinking in vision, I'm using not only all of the information that in my senses, but I'm also using all of the information and data I have internally as well. So it's when you do blue sky thinking, you use vision thinking for getting a bigger picture. It's the biggest picture you can get. But you can't always be up there, because you then make decisions and then you need to action those. That's when you get to drop down in hierarchy to the planning stage of thinking. Now, planning thinking is very, very intensive of lots of different systems, not as many as the vision thinking. But what you're doing then is you're taking your vision and you're bringing it into how am I then going to implement it. So planning is still a very high level way of thinking, because you need to factor in lots of different data. Then you start drilling down to the detail, because if I have a plan, how do I implement it? Then you have to get into the detail. And that's where we get that hyper focus, where we start looking at each individual component of whatever we are doing, whatever, be it a task or be it a goal, so that then we're able to kind of make sure that our thinking in each component is going to get us to the outcome that we're looking at. The difficulty, and this is where everything's a double-edged sword, the more detail you go into, the more you start to recognize the potential problems. The more you recognize potential problems, the more you get that visceral response to that overwhelm. There's a lot going on here. I'm not quite sure. And that's why in this particular model, it's called the drama, because basically what's happening now is you become overwhelmed, you go into survival mode, and you don't open up the top end of your brain, which allows you to go up the hierarchy. So it's just worth bearing in mind. Each one has its place apart from drama. I say that, though, there are times to really enjoy and get actioned about all of the exciting things. So drama is not always negative. It can be positive too. But if you want to know exactly what type of thinking you want to do, you then also look at which level of thinking that you do. So it's like a cross. You want to go across, but you want to go up and down as well.
And this might sound a bit complicated and complex, and it is. The truth be told, it is complex. But what's quite interesting is that when you break it down and understand it, it becomes almost like a mind map for your brain to understand how your decision making is taking place. And once you know how to navigate it, then over a period of time, through some of the techniques that we teach people, it becomes a habit. And then it becomes almost a reflex period of time. So it's really the first sort of kind of a thing. It's like, wow, that's a lot of information. So therefore, what do I do about it? Is when we kind of come into application and we go through the whole program. But that's why we're really trying to bring to your awareness, perhaps, or greater awareness, is not just how you think, but for you to be aware, this is what's playing the minds of your team members. This is what's playing the mind of your board members when they're making decisions. This is what's playing the minds of people that you are serving, your customers. And therefore, to be able to use this information, to be able to serve them better. So it's really understanding, giving that insight, which is, of course, something that we cover up more in the application element. But we really want you to kind of get closer to understanding about how complex thinking is all about. I mean, going back to... Go for it. Go for it, Maria, before I go.
What I was going to say was also, don't underestimate the power of the brain. We do a lot of this. We're just adding words to it. So I think sometimes it is that kind of like, now that we've laid it as a system, it can look more complex, but actually you're doing this, especially when it comes to parenting or looking after your family or your default mode at work. You're doing a lot of it anyway. We're just adding words.
Absolutely. Important words, if I may add.
Important words.
It's a phrase that I often use, is once you know how the code is made and how your brain thinks, you know how to make the code then. You know how to break the code. You really understand. You have tools rather than you to be able to say that I need to be better at problem solving. Now you know how to be better at problem solving. And you know it for life. Because here's another slide, and I know it's got a lot of information, and I promise you I'm not going to go through all of them, but I picked it up from a book summary. By the way, reading book summaries is a great way, I think, so to be able to pick up concepts. Going back to Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, what you can see out here are different things in a blue background, in an orange background, in a green background. For a moment, if you think about those which are in the blue background, which I know is not quite easily visible, but what it really talks about is that there are certain biases and errors that creep into all of us because the way that we have been, the way that we've grown up, the way that we think, because of all of those networks. And there are things known as associations and priming, judgments, emotions, which is why when you have an emotional response, it takes precedence at any point of time. Think about the thinking fast bit that Daniel Kahneman was talking about. Stories. When stories are told, we either reject the story or we accept the story. We sometimes substitute things so that we kind of can understand things better. Our brain tries to go down into understanding and making associations. So let me give you an example just to bring it to life. If I was to say, the fill in the blanks, if there's a word S-O, fill in the blank with an alphabet and P. S-O blank P. But if we were talking about food, chances are you're going to think about soup. But if I was talking about, say, hygiene and cleanliness, you might think it's soap. So what the brain does, it looks at the context and it makes quick associations so that you can fill the gap. So that's what it does. So in life, when you're trying to make decisions at a business level, there are a lot of associations that we do. There are a lot of these kind of decisions that we take at any point of time, or judgment calls that we make, which leads to certain errors and inherent problems in decision making that can happen. And again, on the green kind of bit that you see out there are some of the inherent problems that Daniel starts talking about in his book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which is, there are different words out there, the small samples size, the anchoring, regression to the mean. There are different elements. What it does is that when you're making business commercial decisions, you might be making decisions because you've got a smaller sample size, your brain is precision, or make a judgment call, and then what it does is it connects to known and make that story come true. And before you know, you think, oh, that's why we need to make this decision. So often when people were making in the past technology decisions, what technology strategy, for example, to introduce within their company, just because every company was having a website, I know a lot of leaders who kind of went into the boardroom or the executive said, let's have a website. Does that really serve our customers or not was a question that was never asked, because you really are looking at people who are doing the similar kind of thing and making a decision on what's available to you at any point of time. So there are some inherent biases that kind of creep in, which give us the illusion that we have understood what the problem is. It gives us the illusion that the decisions that we are making is the right decision, because there's some blind spots that we haven't even looked into. Or we're just over optimistic about some decisions, which I always believe people need to be positive, but not about having an optimistic bias when it is about making decisions which are related to life or which are related to making decisions in this. I mean, think about some of these decisions that are out there. Now, a lot of people would say that, I'm very objective in decision making. That's something that you often have leaders saying, which is true, you might be, but be aware of it, that all decisions have an element of unconscious bias. We did an video cast on unconscious bias because there were a lot of organizations that were saying, oh, we don't need to do unconscious bias training. And we were like, no, you need to. And you need to do it far more deeper. The problem is when you do unconscious bias training for half an hour and think, oh, that's sorted. It's unconscious. You need to give it time to people to understand what biases exist. For example, let me ask you that first question. Would you tell a lie to save your friend? Now, some of us might apparently look at that question and say, yes, I would tell a lie. And some of them would look at that question and say, no, I would not tell a lie. Both people are right. But the fact is that you and I might make different decisions because our brain is like a filter. It's the only thing that we have gone through life thus far, all our value systems and our belief system, and it makes a judgment call. And we think that our judgment is the right decision or the right judgment call, but it might not be the case. Which is why it becomes very important when we talk collective decision making, collaborative working, which is some of the applications that we do in our training, is for people to understand not just how they're thinking, but how other people are thinking. Then the question about why do we like certain working styles and not others? Could it be that because you're good at certain working styles? I know some people who are extremely planful and organized and get really irritated when they have work team members who at work or even at home who are not that planful. But just because that bias crept in because you're good at a particular thing. So again, we start throwing light on the for people to understand what are these biases that are coming in. And again, going back to the point that we're making earlier on, why it becomes important for us to be aware of these biases is because when your brain is crowded, and again, we're repeating it, today's day and time, the brain is pretty crowded because of the life that we lead. It becomes important to be aware of biases because we might be making those decisions because of all of those inherent aspects that we've talked about thus far, which might be very quick and fast, but they might not necessarily be the one. I mean, this is a class. The next one is a classic, isn't it? Should you hire this candidate or not? Going back to some of the judgments that we were talking about, you might just spend a lot of time trying to wonder whether the candidate is good or not. But often what people do is, oh, that person's value system is same as mine. He must be a pretty good person. Or actually, she likes the same kind of working style as me. So I think I should hire the person. Or, they are from a particular management background or a particular industry that's similar to mine. So therefore, let me kind of go in for that bias, the affinity bias that we talk about, right? So some of those thinking start coming in, which is why it's important to understand how we think, and therefore it becomes far more better for us to be able to kind of take decisions. The others out there, you can have a look and say that these are important questions, and to be aware of the fact that you or your team members or your leaders might be making decisions which have got an element of unconscious bias because the way that they're wired, because of the way that they're thinking. And we really want to declutter that aspect out in our program as well. Can I invite you, Maria, to talk a little bit more about brain being a filter and how we think about certain decisions? and then we'll go into our cognitive skills before we close up for today.
That's so fascinating, because as you said, the brain's a filter. We can't take in all the information that's coming in. We would be entirely overwhelmed. So what it does is it does a quick, broad brushstroke appraisal, and then it makes its decisions from there. You know, you were talking about hiring people. In real terms, we like people who are like us. It's really hard to get out of the comfort zone and go, I'm gonna specifically hire that person, because they're very, very different. It's primal, it's tribal. And a lot of our programming, a lot of the first program, if you use the analogy of computers with the brain, a lot of our first programs are very, very tribal, because that's what kept us alive on the plains and the savannah, away from those saber-toothed tigers. The other point that I think is just really important to actually just totally talk about again and emphasize, the brain does backwards rationalization. How I feel, I want to do something, and then my brain will fill in a really good reason. But actually, it was just because I wanted to do it. So what's really useful when it comes to knowing your brain's a filter is to be curious around that. You know, rather than allowing it to come up with this very elaborate reason as to why it's really important, blah, it's much more useful to go, why do I want to do that really? Because at least then we're getting to that authenticity. We're getting to the place that goes, you just really want to do that. And then your brain will find any kind of rationalization. So it's working out also that the brain is incredibly sophisticated and complex, as well as being incredibly simple. And it's that kind of dichotomy that is really going to allow people to get the best out of their thinking, to know that you can organize your thinking and all of the data, but you can also feel something and just crack on with that as well. So yeah, our brain's definitely a filter, Rena, for sure.
And such a great point that you made out there as well, because the brain is a filter in the way that you've explained it out. After a period of time, what happens is that because the way we're thinking, it becomes kind of like a habit. We don't even think about it, right? And those habits start creating what we call mindsets. And nowadays, a lot of people are talking about mental resilience, having a resilient mindset. So it's really about breaking away from some of those default thinking and patterns that we have, so that we can come up with new ideas and be able to address the problems that are coming up, which we weren't aware of at an earlier day and age. I love this next framework, which I want to very briefly touch upon. Because when we're talking about helping people understand how the brain works and empowering them with some amazing techniques that we do, many of them, which I wouldn't have the time to go through at this moment of time. But what it does, it starts helping you create a certain kind of a mindset which is required. Here's the McKenzie Mindset that has been put together actually during lockdown time. And it touches upon some of the things. In fact, being ever curious, the one that you just talked about, Maria, is right there as one of the elements about how you can think different way. How there's so many lovely aspects about that. Having that dragon eye kind of a viewpoint. Do you have a dragon eye kind of a viewpoint of really looking at things through multiple lenses, but to be aware that at a default level it is next to impossible to do it, and therefore to be able to slow down. So what is it that you can do in the moment, and what is it you can do at a long term? I mean, things we talked about like meditation and mindfulness are things that create that reserve energy for us to have this kind of a mindset that is required in today's day and time. Not, do you want to be a perfectionist, or do you want to be an imperfectionist? Most of the people that we work with right now have this tendency to be a perfectionist, and that can create a problem. It can be limiting in the way that you can grow as an individual. How are you doing storytelling? Are you walking the talk? What is it that you're doing to really tap into collective intelligence? So understanding how you can tap into the intelligence of other people becomes really valuable when you know how the brain works. Here's a quick quiz for you, because of the 8 skills that we really focus our attention on in the new Blue program. We call it the 8 essentials. It is something that's required for any leader at this moment of time. And I'm going to just pause there for a moment for you to read through it and kind of rate yourself very quickly on a scale of 1 to 10. How would you rate yourself on a scale of memory? whereby you can really encode and retrieve relevant knowledge, or connecting the dots between two disparate objects and yet make a narrative make sense for you, your business, your teams, or your customer. How is it can you summarize when you've kind of have to go forward, present, say, to a board of directors, or perhaps to possible virtual to venture capitalists, sorry, and have to kind of make a pitch? How well are you in summarizing and creating a narrative or a story that makes sense to the other person? How are you in your interpreting skills? Because the fact of the matter is that we all interpret things in different ways. Yet you think your interpretation is the right one, and I think mine is. So how good are we in trying to interpret not just my story, but the story of other people? How good are you in ideating? And how good are you being able to take executive decisions, the execution? Because what execution requires is some really vital decision making. So here are some of the skills that we really like to focus our attention on and be able to help you be able to lead yourself, your teams, and business to greater success in 2022, which is, of course, a year which is going to be game changing for a lot of people. Maria, any comments from you on this slide before we close up for today's session?
I think what's really important is the fact that we've pulled things out and made them discrete, because there's a lot of, you need to be able to do this, this, and this. It's like, how? And actually, we are very, very sophisticated animals, but we're also very, very simple. And by differentiating between things, what it allows people to do is find their way of doing something. We can give them all of the ideas. We have far too many. We have so many tools, etc. And what lands with someone is their individual way of doing it, and pulling these things apart so that you know your journey to where you want to get to, but also enjoy the journey as you go. Absolutely.
So important to be in the journey. In fact, talking about journey, we'll be back with you the fourth Tuesday of this month and start unwrapping and unpacking some of these concepts in our first part of being able to be far more stronger in your thinking and to be able to really open doors on the topic of mental resilience. So we'll be back with you on the 25th of January. Whole host of concepts shared with you today. Please feel free to watch the recording or to share it with your teams. And of course, if you have a question, please do pass it to Maria and myself. Your feedback and questions keeps us alive and keeps us on our toes so that we are thinking for you and for all of us. This is TBQ Live signing off for today. Thank you very much for joining us. See you on the 25th.
Thank you for taking time. Bye.
Bye for now.